Today, we're talking about everybody's favorite infrared film stock, Rollei Infrared. I've recently been feeling dissatisfied with the film photography process. There hasn't been nearly enough self-inflicted turmoil and my exposure hit rate has been far too high. So I thought it was time to do something about that. Since I don't have the money to shoot large format, I decided that shooting infrared film would just have to do. So me and my good buddy Hugo headed to a couple of spots and I prepared to put my entire sense of self-worth into the results of this roll of film.
Same 1/8 of a second at 5.6. So
for those of you that don't know, Rollei Infrared is a black and white infrared film with a spectral sensitivity that extends to an impressive 780 nanometers, which is into the infrared spectrum. Ah, that's really cool. So how does it look when you take a photo with infrared sensitive film? Like Hey, what gives? I thought this was infrared film. Well, since Rollei Infrared is still sensitive to the visible spectrum, the visible light overpowers the infrared light in a sense, giving you the flat, bland photo you see here. If you really want to see Rollei Infrared shine, you're going to need to put on an infrared filter. Like this. What does an infrared filter do? It effectively cuts the transmission of light below a certain wavelength. The one I used on this roll was an IR720 filter, meaning that any light below 720 nanometers on the light spectrum won't pass through the filter. When you combine that with the extended sensitivity of Rollei Infrared, you can produce some pretty cool images, kind of like this. It still kind of looks like Like anything worth doing, the process of shooting Rollei Infrared is harder than it feels like it needs to be, and the results are unpredictable. My subject of choice, as with a lot of infrared photography, are lush landscapes with lots of green, lots of foliage, and a nice blue sky. The theory being that the chloroplast found in most vegetation is a great reflector of infrared light, making it appear bright white in the case of Rollei Infrared. The blue sky, on the other hand, is rendered as a deep black since blue light is blocked out, thanks to it being the farthest away from infrared on the visible spectrum. Probably. Now, I had just the spot with an abundance of green to shoot the remainder of my roll, but I didn't really want to show that on camera, so I headed to the botanical gardens. Although the weather wasn't perfect for shooting, which I'll touch on a wee bit later, I did manage to shoot this photo, which is one of my favorites that I've shot on Rollei Infrared so far. I don't know exactly what it is about it, but everything just works. If you're planning on shooting Rollei Infrared yourself, there's a few things to watch out for. Where you're facing relative to the sun is going to drastically change how the skies are rendered. In this first shot here, the sun is almost completely behind me, whereas the second shot is almost the complete inverse. Of course, other factors like time of day are going to affect this, but that's not just for infrared photography, babe. Similarly, it's also important to make sure the sun isn't obscured by anything. So if some cloud rolls in front of the sun or you're shooting in the shade, you might find your images kind of flat and not too dissimilar from normal black and white film. Rollei Infrared works off of reflected infrared light, and it's kind of hard to reflect any infrared light if there's not any to begin with. So now we know what to shoot and when, but how do we shoot it? I usually compose my shot first and then I get my shot in focus, but infrared light focuses closer than visible light. So how do we deal with that? Well, you'll notice on older lenses there's often a red dot on the focus ring. which is effectively a marker for where to offset your focus to compensate for the focus shift caused by infrared light. But alternatively, if you're not a f***ing nerd, you can take my school of thought, which is shoot everything at f11 and assume that it'll all be in focus, which has worked pretty well this far. Once I'm happy with my shot and it's in focus, I screw on my infrared filter and take a meter reading using my camera's internal meter. Just trust me, use the camera's internal meter. The amount of effort it requires trying to hold the filter up on an external meter, it's not worth it. You'll somehow end up with a shot that's like 10 stops overexposed somehow. I don't fucking know how that happens, but just trust me, your camera's internal meter with the filter on is going to be good enough. It's going to be fine. Just do that. Finally, I've selected a few frames from a second roll that really highlight what I love about Rollei Infrared. I really like this shot with the tulips. They were different colors, red and yellow, but they all seemed to reflect the same amount of infrared light, which I thought was pretty interesting. And that's Rollei Infrared. I would absolutely recommend that everybody tries shooting some if you haven't already. I find it to be one of the cheaper black and white films whenever I buy film, cheaper than HP5 most of the time, and getting the scans back from that first roll, one of the most magical experiences I've had ever shooting film, hands down. If you're in a rut, if you're not feeling yourself, shoot a roll of Rollei Infrared and thank me later. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.